Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again on the State of Freedom.
Moms for Liberty East Baton Rouge Parish Chapter is dedicated to fighting for the survival of America by unifying, educating, and empowering parents to defend and take back their parental rights at all levels of government. To learn more or to get involved with Moms for Liberty East Baton Rouge, email momsforlibertybatonrouge@gmail.com. That's moms, the number 4, Liberty Baton Rouge @gmail.com. The email address is on the Patriot page of our website, freedomstate.us, and it's in the show notes. Today, we're joined by a returning guest to the show, Ed Tarpley. Ed is an attorney from right here in Louisiana who's been faithfully fighting for truth and justice and now is also fighting for fair, transparent elections in all 50 states. Before we talk to Ed, let me read the scripture of the day. It is Psalm chapter 14, verses 4 through 7. And it says, "Look how they live in luxury while exploiting my people. Won't these workers of wickedness ever learn? They don't ever even think of praying to God. But just look at them now in panic, trembling with terror, for the Lord is on the side of the generation of loyal lovers. The Lord is always the safest place for the poor when the workers of wickedness oppress them. How I wish that Israel's rescue would arise from the midst of Zion. When his people are restored, Jacob's joy will break forth and Israel will be glad." And doesn't this sound like it could have been written yesterday instead of 3,000 years ago? You know, the Jewish rabbis talk about time looking like a coil or a tornado, where what happened before comes back around again and again. And I believe we're in a time right now where the Lord's rescue of us is rising, and he is partnering with us in our own rescue. And y'all know I love to say that. But that's why we have to vote. That's why so many of you have taken up responsibility to be poll watchers and commissioners, or you've taken on some other role that brings accountability to the systems that have been used to oppress the people. That's why we do this podcast. That's why Chris and Katie started LaCag. And I also believe that the Lord is going to use a sovereign move that is far beyond what we can imagine to rescue us. But even those sovereign moves of God require our faith and our participation. The Israelites didn't magically appear on the other side of the Red Sea. They had to pack their bags, follow Moses, and walk through the Red Sea. And the people of Israel had to march around Jericho for 7 days in silence and then lift up a great shout in order for the walls to come down. This is a time where it's absolutely critical, and it may even be life or death critical, to live in faith and in quick and complete obedience to the Lord, because this is how we participate in his rescue of us.
Danielle, you're so right. We have to participate. We are his instruments. We've said that over and over on the show. We are his hands and feet on earth. God just not wave a magic wand and give us the results that we want. It requires our tenacity, our effort, and our participation. He expects us to perform. He expects us to act consistently in courage to advance the cause of righteousness on earth. And so that's such a timely scripture today. Speaking of someone who has consistently advanced the cause of righteousness and has done so much, is in the process of doing something right now, Ed Tarpley, it's such a pleasure to have you with us again today, sir.
Yes, it's great to be with you both, Chris and Danielle. And this is just a really exciting time right now. There's so many things happening all over the country. It's just hard to fathom all the activities that are taking place in all 50 states. So looking forward to talking with all of y'all about that today. So glad to be here.
Thank you, Ed. You recently filed on the 16th a petition in the U.S. Supreme Court, which was very compelling on the merits, seeking that the court order that only lawful votes be counted in the election, paper ballots, hand counting, and absolute voter ID. There have been issues in elections with all of those things, and anybody who is observing the scene knows that they're all vulnerable. Tell us about that petition for writ of mandamus at the Supreme Court, what happened, and where you're going from here.
Yes, well, look, it was a great effort. I thought that our petition was well drafted, and we had a lot of information in there. We had a lot of case citations, and I thought we made a really good argument as to why the U.S. Supreme Court should set some minimum constitutional standards involving election integrity nationwide. one of the things that we're very concerned about is the lack of voter ID in many states. And so we went forward with that petition. We filed it, like you say, in the court. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court rejected the petition. We got a written notice last Friday indicating that the clerk of the Supreme Court said that our petition did not adequately state the extraordinary and exigent circumstances which were required for the Supreme Court to take jurisdiction without going through lower federal courts, the district court and the Court of Appeals. And of course, we obviously disagree with the clerk's decision because we felt like our petition, that was what it was all about, was talking about how important this was, how critical this was, and how, we needed to move on this right away.
Well, and Ed, how obvious do we need to be here?
Yeah, I know. So, so anyway, but look, I was disappointed, but I understand that's the way the system works. And, that thousands of petitions are filed to the Supreme Court every year, and only a handful are ever taken.
Yeah.
So the clerk's office does act as kind of a gatekeeper, and we understand that. And but we would have, we thought it would have been great if our petition, would have been able to make it to the justices and be considered by them. But that was not to be. So that's okay. We move on. And what we're doing now is in the wake of what happened with our petition, lo and behold, we now have probably the biggest case that's come before the Supreme Court this year on election integrity. And this is the Virginia case involving the removal of non-citizens from the voting rolls. So that's where we are right now. And what we are working on is an amicus brief. We've been working on that the last couple of days. And hopefully we plan to have that filed by 3:00 Eastern time today.
Now, Ed, the basis for the federal district court judge dismissing Governor Youngkin's suit was that federal law prohibits the purging of the voter rolls within 90 days of an election. That seems to be her central basis. What is the counter argument to that as you move forward?
Well, I think the state of Virginia believes, and I'm just going off of what their petition stated, they believe that she misread the law, and that the 90-day period has to do with the state having 90 days to set up a program to evaluate whether or not a person is a citizen and whether or not they have met all the requirements to be registered in that state.
But Ed, that's not what you're dealing with here. You're dealing with people who are admittedly or who have been established to be non-citizens and therefore ineligible to vote. So do you really have to go through that process?
That's right. And that's exactly what Governor Youngkin has said, the Virginia governor, Glenn Youngkin, and the Attorney General, Jason Miraz. They both argued that they are operating based on Virginia law that has been in place for over 20 years, which provides a process for them to remove people from the voter rolls who are not citizens. And so, and these are not citizens. And what's furthermore, the 1,600 individuals in question are people who self-identified as a non-citizen. So, I mean, I don't even know why we're in court on this. I mean, this is just, the whole thing is ridiculous. I mean, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The only thing we can say is that the Biden Justice Department is the entity that has sued, asking for the state to be placed on the state of Virginia's action to remove these non-citizens from the voting rolls. So, I mean, you have to ask yourself, why is the Biden Justice Department suing a state who is trying to follow the law, follow Virginia law, and see to it that non-citizens are not on the voting roll? So,
and to be clear, Ed, and just to be clear for our listeners, there is no argument about whether or not these 1,600 individuals are non-citizens, whether or not they are, in fact, not legally able to vote. You're not arguing that.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, I think Governor Youngkin's made it clear, and I think that the Supreme Court will rule in Virginia's favor on this issue. But let me just say, what we've done is we're working hard right now. I've already looked at a couple of drafts of our amicus brief, and we should have that filed later this afternoon. But essentially, we are pointing out that the intrusion of the federal government into Virginia and asking for the federal judge to take the action that she took basically runs counter to the system that is in place, that the states should have control over their elections, and that what Governor Youngkin was doing was following Virginia law. This is a law that's been in place in Virginia for over 20 years. So there's no question about whether he was following Virginia law. He was following the Virginia Constitution and the federal Constitution. So I think what Governor Youngkin did in removing these non-citizens from the voting roll was lawful and, pursuant to all federal and state statutes. So in any event, I don't think that the Department of Justice, the federal Department of Justice, really has a leg to stand on here. And, it's just, it's more, if you want to call it lawfare, it's more of the weaponization of the Department of Justice. I mean, to engage in this sort of activity this close to the election is clearly something that they should not do. And I think that the Supreme Court is going to uphold what Governor Youngkin has done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Ed, I read, I believe this morning or last night, that I think 28 state AGs are joining Governor Youngkin's case. And even this summer, we were hearing from Mississippi, West Virginia, other states, secretaries of state, that the federal government was actively registering illegals in their states. And so this is a pretty widespread problem. I know that in Louisiana, we worked on legislation to make sure that non-citizens couldn't register. Of course, that's not active yet. And I don't believe that the few illegal immigrants or the few illegals that were on our voter rolls found by our Secretary of State's office are representative of the depth of the problem. But I guess to get back to your point of these 1,600 voters or illegal voters, if the Supreme Court does not uphold the rights of the legal, lawful voters of Virginia, is there any recourse? Can the Virginia government say, you know what, if any race is within 1,600 votes, we're not going to certify?
Well, they maybe could take that action. Let me just say this. I think that if you look at what the states are doing to try to ensure that lawful voters are on the voting rolls, then everything that Governor Youngkin has done and the state of Virginia has done is consistent with what other states are doing nationwide to try to ensure that we have accurate voting rolls. States have control over their elections, and that includes the voting rolls. That includes the voter registration process. And so there are many states that are going through and cleaning up voting rolls. There are people that have moved out of state. There are people that have died, people that have not voted within a certain length of time. All of these people should be removed from the voting rolls. And so, unfortunately, in many states, this doesn't happen on a regular basis, but it should. And that's what we see happening here. What Governor Youngkin in the state of Virginia did is consistent with states running their own elections and with them maintaining accurate voting rolls. So let me follow up with one thing. Yesterday, I met with Attorney General Liz Murrill, Louisiana's Attorney General. She was in Pineville speaking at a luncheon there. Had a chance to speak to her briefly afterwards and about the election issues in Virginia, in fact, and a couple of other election integrity issues. And she said that she had decided that day to join with other attorneys general nationwide in filing an amicus brief in this case. So
Right.
I found that out from her yesterday. And you're absolutely right. Other states are doing that. I don't think their amicus brief has been filed yet. It may be while we're on this show this morning. But all of these briefs, I think, are due in by 3:00 this afternoon. Or at least that's the time that Chief Justice Roberts gave, was 3:00 Eastern time for the other side of the litigation to respond. So I think that because of the time element involved here, that the Supreme Court will probably act quickly on this. I'm going to say within the next 1 or 2 days. I can't believe that they would wait very long on a matter of this importance.
And hopefully, Ed, they will rule favorably. Let's just hypothetically say that the Supreme Court does not rule favorably. Let's say they uphold the appeals court. What kind of implications it seems like the implications of this would be quite profound with regard to the constitutional jurisdiction of states to manage their own election affairs, including specifically to clean people who we all know are illegal off the rolls. It just seems like the precedent, if you get an adverse ruling on this, would be quite dangerous and far reaching. And hopefully the U.S. Supreme Court recognizes that.
Yeah, I just don't think that's going to happen. Now, look, we could all be wrong here. I agree with you. I think that it would be a terrible precedent to set, certainly for the federal government, the Department of Justice. Now, they sued the state of Virginia. Let's understand who the parties are here. They sued the state of Virginia. I mean, there were some other plaintiffs in there too, but I mean, basically, it's the Department of Justice suing the state of Virginia to stop them from removing the non-citizens from the voting rolls. So this liberal, a Democrat appointed judge in Virginia ruled in their favor. And her ruling was that the state of Virginia had to keep these people on the rolls. So the state appeals that. They go straight to the Supreme Court. So that's where we are on this. I think that it would be a travesty if the Supreme Court forced the state of Virginia to keep non-citizens on the voting rolls. I mean, that simply doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I think that everybody would agree that non-citizens should not be on the voting rolls. And so, well, the problem with that is, look, the dilution of your vote. I mean, and this is a big issue, dilution of your votes. And this is something that this is one of the reasons why in our petition for writ of mandamus, we had asked for the court to require a certain level of voter ID nationwide. And here's why we came to that point. There's about, 24 states that have that require photo ID in the United States. I think there's 11 other states that require ID but not photo ID. And then there's about 15 or so states, 14 or 15 states that don't require any ID at all. Okay, so you have a broad array of different requirements for identifications of voters at the time you go and vote. Well, the problem with that is that in California, where we have a huge amount of illegal aliens, the state has passed a law which makes it a crime to ask about voter ID. Not only do they not require it in the state of California, you can't even ask about it. It's a crime. That's crazy. I mean, how can that be?
It is so crazy.
That is just crazy. So the problem we've got there, now here's the problem. I mean, we have 50 states, we have 50 sovereign states, and the Constitution reserves to the states the authority and the control of elections in their states, federal elections. I mean, the elections are controlled by the states individually. And so what do you do? How do you address the problem in California, where you likely have thousands of illegal aliens voting, thousands of non-citizens voting, because there's no requirement for voter ID, and it's against the law to ask about voter ID? Well, how does that affect our votes in Louisiana? What's the effect on us? I mean, we have strict voter ID in Louisiana. There's one thing we do have. We have voter ID. We have photo ID. You have to show it when you go vote. I'm proud of the fact that Louisiana has that. Okay.
Yeah.
We have stronger laws than California. So what the problem is what they call dilution, the dilution of your vote, okay, that your vote is being canceled out by the vote of an illegal alien in California, that every vote should be equal. Every vote should be counted equally nationwide. And how can you say that is true when you have a state where it's likely that thousands of illegal aliens are voting? So that's why we had asked the Supreme Court in the petition for writ of mandamus to order some type of minimum standard for voter ID. Of course, that wasn't taken up, but we think that it will be taken up. We think that this is coming to the Supreme Court one day and that they will have to rule on this, because I think we have to have some minimum constitutional standards. I don't want to see the federal government control our elections. Absolutely not. I want us to have independent elections in our state, just like in Texas and Mississippi and all the other states. But the fact is, I think there's some minimum constitutional standards that should be there. And one of those, I think, is voter ID.
Yeah, and it really seems like a no-brainer. And I'm intrigued by the argument, which I think is very compelling, that it is disenfranchisement. When you're allowing people in one state who are not legally eligible to vote, it dilutes votes across the country ultimately. We're not electing the president of California. We're electing the president of the United States of America. And what happens in one state, whether it's legal or illegal, directly affects what happens in other states and the ultimate outcome of an election. So we're all tied in here. States don't exist in a vacuum. That's such an excellent point you make.
Yeah, and Ed, what I loved about your petition was that it was going to force the hand of the secretaries of state to actually enforce the laws on their own books, which they are not doing right now, including our Secretary of State, I might add. Is there any chance that that petition has another shot at coming back up, or is there anything like it in the works that would really force the issue?
Well, I think all the issues that we raised in our petition for writ of mandamus are solid issues. And I think that they will all come back up in one form or another. Of course, you know how it works. There has to be a case that starts in the district court level, and then it moves to the Court of Appeals and then to the Supreme Court. So it takes a period of years for this to happen. But the answer to the question is, I hope that happens. And I think it probably will happen because here's the point to be made. Election integrity is an issue that's not going away. It doesn't matter
Right.
what happens in this election. It's not going away. This is going to continue to be an issue year in and year out, year in and year out until we solve the problem. Because all the people really have left are the elections. I mean, the progressive left controls everything else. I mean, the elections is the only place where average citizens, liberty-minded, free Americans can go and vote without being controlled or intimidated by corporate America or the federal government or the woke universities or whoever it may be. But elections is where everybody stands the same. Doesn't matter if you're a millionaire or if you're a pauper. The fact is your vote counts the same. And that's what's great about America, and it's what's great about our state, that we have free and fair elections. So the fight over elections is going to continue because we see the problems that are out there. They're in the news every day right now. Okay, so this is not going to
Yeah.
go away. Now let's talk about something that just came up on Friday. You probably are aware of this. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal handed down a ruling late Friday afternoon stating that the law in Mississippi, which allowed ballots to be counted 5 days after the election, was unconstitutional, and that the ballots had to be counted by election day. Okay, this is a really big case. It's in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and let me give you a little background on it. During COVID, Mississippi passed a law during the pandemic to allow absentee votes to be counted up to 5 days after the election. Prior to that time, they didn't have a law like this. Okay, well, Texas doesn't have this law. Louisiana doesn't have this law. In Texas and Louisiana, all the ballots must be counted by election day. So that's always been the law. I mean, we all know that. We've grown up with this system. I mean, when I was at LSU, I knew that if I was going to vote absentee as a student, I'd ask for my ballot, fill out my ballot, and then I had to mail it in enough time to get back to Grant Parish so it could be voted. It would be counted on election day. That was my responsibility. If I wanted my vote to be counted, I had to
Yep.
make sure it was in the mail in enough time to get back to the parish seat, Colfax, to be received at the courthouse so the registrar would have the ballot and it would be counted on election day. That's my responsibility as a citizen. Okay. And guess what? If I didn't mail it in time and it didn't get there in time, it didn't get counted. And that's what
Yep.
happened. So
Yeah.
we all know that's always been the law in Louisiana. Well, I think that was probably always the law in Mississippi until they changed it. But guess what? The Fifth Circuit said that the Constitution requires elections to be voted, the votes to be counted by election day, on election day. Look, this is a major, major ruling
It's
because I'm
huge.
telling you, if this is the law nationwide, this changes everything.
Yeah. It certainly, Ed, changes the prospect of having to wait 3, 4, 5, 6 days to figure out what the outcome is. It does have broad implications. Is this being appealed by the losing party to the U.S. Supreme Court?
I think this case will eventually go to the Supreme Court.
Is this case being appealed by the losing party to the U.S. Supreme Court?
Okay, so that was a question that I was asked last night, and the answer is I don't know. Okay, so if the losing party doesn't appeal it, well, it stays in the Fifth Circuit, and the ruling only affects Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, 3 states in the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. If it is appealed, then it goes to the Supreme Court. But what's happened here is that all we need is a contrary ruling in another federal court for there to be a split in the circuits, and then that would qualify to go up to the Supreme Court. And so I think eventually this case, or a case like this, will get to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will make a decision on this. I think if the Supreme Court ruled that under the Constitution of the United States, Election Day is Election Day and the votes all have to be counted by Election Day, wow, that would take care of a lot of problems that we have nationwide. And I mean, we don't have those problems, in Louisiana and Texas the way they have in Mississippi. I mean, the way they have in Pennsylvania and some of the other states where they take 2 or 3 weeks to count the votes. I mean, we've never seen anything like that in our state, of course. But, this is a problem that is going to have to be addressed. And it just needs to stop. I mean, we need to count the votes on Election Day, and elections need to be over on Election Day.
Like they always were. Ed, if this is appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court sustains the Fifth Circuit, depending on the language of their ruling, that could have implications for every state, right?
Absolutely. Oh, no. Look, as soon as this ruling came out, look, and I followed this closely. As soon as this came out on Friday, the response by the progressive left media was just unbelievable. I mean, it was just like a volcanic eruption. I mean, Slate magazine and all these others liberal, magazines and publications are coming out. Yeah, this is a terrible ruling. This could completely change the elections in the country. I mean, man, these guys were just
screeching, gnashing of teeth.
they were having a meltdown, as Steve Bannon would say. They were having a meltdown. Okay, so and by the way, Steve Bannon is free today. Steve Bannon is back on the air. So he was released from federal prison this morning, and I watched him briefly before I came on with you guys. So Steve Bannon is back. Praise the Lord, and can't wait to hear all of his stories. He looks like he's lost a little weight while he was in there. He's looks in good
Whoever
shape.
Said jail can't do anything good for you.
Anyway, he said this morning he's got some stories to tell. So I can't wait to hear.
I bet he does. It's clear that in these uncertain economic times, we absolutely must protect our wealth from dollar and market volatility. Precious metals are a proven store of value, and many believe that gold and silver are poised to make historic gains in the months and years ahead. That's why I'm so proud to be part of a company that is helping more and more everyday people like you and me do just that. Metal Stacks is a precious metals collectors club where you can buy your metals at the best prices on the market, actual dealer cost. They are beating the prices of the big sites and have no credit card fees and no minimums. Shipping is free for orders over $500. You can also refer people to Metal Stacks for an additional income. If you are just interested in purchasing metals, you can visit metalstacks.com/DWalker, which would be great because I'll get the commission. And if you're interested in learning about the business aspect of Metal Stacks, email me directly at Danielle@freedomstate.us. Now, Ed, we're in the middle of the election right now, and I can understand why the Trump team has been talking about early voting so much, why they've been talking about too big to rig, because we've seen how much fraud has been exposed during this early voting period. We've seen that people are going out in overwhelming numbers, and it's hitting against that narrative that says that this is a 51-49 type of election, which we know it's absolutely not. Do you think that too big to rig will prevail?
I think so. I think that we have a groundswell of public opinion nationwide, and I think that yes, I think it's going to be a massive victory. But here's the caveat on that: we still have to win by electoral votes, and even if we ran up great majorities in the red states, in Texas, Florida, and Ohio, which I believe President Trump is going to carry easily, we still have to win some of those blue states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. There's a handful of states that we've got to win one of those states in order to do this. I think it looks like that from all the indications that I'm getting that he's going to win North Carolina. Georgia is, I guess, still up in the air, but I believe he'll win Georgia. What's going to happen in Nevada, we don't know. What's going to happen in Arizona, we don't know. I mean, it's just a crazy system out there. But, he's got to win something up in the north, in the Midwest. And, the big one is Pennsylvania. That's where everybody's putting all the attention. But Michigan could be a sleeper. Michigan could come through for Trump. Yeah. What's really interesting is Michigan is, you've got the Arab Americans, the Muslim community in Michigan, which
Minnesota.
In Michigan. That's an interesting
It's in Michigan.
story.
Okay.
Right. It's in Michigan, right? And they apparently, do not like Kamala Harris and do not like what the Democrats are doing. So I don't know. That's kind of an interesting dynamic there that they would be coming to Trump, but I think that they're offended and upset about Kamala Harris and the way they've been treated, I guess, up there by the Democratic Party. And lo and behold, they seem to be coming to Trump this election. Wow. Well, that could be a game changer in Michigan. So we don't know what's happening
Yeah.
there, but that's a large Muslim American community up there. So I don't know what's going to happen in Minnesota. I think Minnesota is probably going to go for the Democrats, but I just hope and pray that we're prepared for what's going to happen after the election because.
Yeah. And that's what I wanted to ask you about, Ed. Well, let me ask you this. Assuming Trump wins this, assuming he overcomes the cheat and he gets it and he wins the election, we've got a sitting U.S. congressman and maybe more who are basically swearing that they're not going to certify the election, even if Trump wins the election.
So I think, look, a couple of things are really important here. Number one, the Democrats, Jamie Raskin is probably the leader of this, but they're going to try to deny President Trump the victory in Congress if they can. Okay, so we know that's the game plan. And look, that's why the House of Representatives is so important. I mean, we only have a tiny, a 3-vote majority, a 4-vote majority. Let me just say, as an aside, that the election of Elbert Guillory in Louisiana could be critical to holding on to the House of Representatives.
It's huge.
Now,
It's huge.
I hope it's not. I hope we win some other Republican seat in the nation and that doesn't happen. But let me tell you something, Elbert Guillory, that seat is really vital now. And we sure need a Republican there.
And winnable.
And winnable, too. And winnable. Absolutely. So, yes, I think there's going to be an effort after the election to deny President Trump. It's going to be a bare-knuckle fight all the way. There's going to be lawsuits, litigation. Kamala Harris campaign announced, I think it was yesterday or day before, that they've hired Mark Elias, a Democrat election lawyer that's been so involved, with years with Democrats. And he was involved with the Steele dossier and the Russia hoax. He was working at Perkins Coie, the law firm in Washington, D.C. I mean, look, this guy has been out there, and he's like the symbol of the Democrat lawfare. And so,
that's right. There's nothing he won't do.
The thing that I find the most sinister about this, Ed, the thing that I find most sinister about this from a broader perspective, as I look at this, is these people do not care whether the American people want President Trump and whether he gets a majority of votes and whether he's legitimately elected by the American people. They don't care. Their goal is to sabotage the will of the American people and subvert our election process so that they can maintain their power. And I find that more dangerously sinister and even treasonous than anything I can think of.
Well, it is very dangerous, and it shows you the lengths that they will go to maintain power and control. So we have to be vigilant. We have to fight against this. And fortunately, I believe the Republican Party is much better positioned this time than they were 4 years ago. I think we have the Article 3 project, led by Mike Davis. We've got the RNC lawyers all around the country. I mean, Harmeet Dillon, the renowned attorney from San Francisco. I know she is working in Arizona. I know that the legal teams are scattered across the country to be
America
fighting.
First Legal, and probably what's Tom Fitton's group called?
Judicial Watch.
Judicial Watch. So you've got, look, let me tell you something. Right now, it's all hands on deck. I mean, it's call to general quarters. Okay, that's what it is. All hands on deck. Everybody out there is fighting because everybody knows what happened 4 years ago. And the Republican Party and the Trump campaign cannot be caught asleep like they were 4 years ago. I mean, I'm just telling you, and look, and not that they weren't warned 4 years ago, because they were. I mean, there were people talking about the potential for fraud and everything that eventually did happen. That was all talked about before the election in 2020. But this year, I think we have more lawyers and more people involved. And I just don't think that the Democrats will be able to do in 2024 what they did in 2020. But that's not to say they won't try.
And Ed, we saw so many cases thrown out because of standing after 2020, whether it was challenging the outcome of the election or challenging the system of the election period. Do you think that the attorneys that are all hands on deck here have learned some lessons and have some strategies for obtaining standing and not getting their cases thrown out if and when they have to go to court?
Well, I think so. And I think that the proof of that is the fact that we have had many cases filed this past year in federal court and state courts all around the country litigating various issues. Now, the Republicans have won some of those, Republicans have lost some. I mean, we just had a ruling, I think it was in Michigan, the Supreme Court ruled that votes that are received after ballots that are received after Election Day will be counted. Well, that's contrary to the ruling of the Fifth Circuit that handed down on Friday that the votes that are received after Election Day will not be counted. So, yes, there's some wins and losses out there. But I think in one state there was a lawsuit regarding whether a college ID would suffice as a photo identification, and that was turned down. The court said no, college ID does not suffice. It has to be, I think the ruling, and I didn't read that case, but I think the ruling probably was it has to be a government issued ID like a driver's license or something like that. So in any event, there are cases that are before the courts right now. So I think that the difference between now and 2020 is the fact that we have cases in the pipeline in different courts all around the country, and we didn't have that
Yeah.
in 2024.
So we're not reacting. We're being much more proactive.
No question. Absolutely. No question. We're much further ahead of the curve this year than we were 4 years ago. But let me tell you what, the problem still remains that once a ballot gets into the system and it gets counted, it's almost impossible to pull that back. Okay, so that's why we're fighting. The Republicans, those people that are fighting for fair and transparent elections are fighting so hard to make sure that only citizens are voting, that ballots are counted by Election Day, that the ballots are verified properly, that all of these things are being done, and that the process of counting the votes is so important. I mean, we heard the stories about ballots being pushed through machines multiple times at voting centers. I mean, that's the sort of thing that just can't happen. I mean, that's just outright fraud. And so we've got to make sure that we have poll watchers, people on the ground. That's why poll watchers are so important. And so, in fact, let me just say this real quick. In our petition for writ of mandamus, we had asked the Supreme Court to order a system of transparent voter activity on Election Day at voting precincts, that there would be no refusal of people to come in to observe the counting of the votes. You remember what happened? Remember, people were not allowed into the precincts, and remember how they put up
huge problem.
Cardboard, right? They put up cardboard to prevent people from looking into the windows. Don't you remember that? That was crazy.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that was in Michigan.
Yeah, I can't. Well, maybe Philadelphia. I can't remember now which state that
I can't.
But the point is, I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, this is. We have to be able to observe the counting of the votes
At a very basic level.
Yeah, if a person wants to advertise their criminality, putting up poster boards on windows at voting precincts so nobody can see what you're doing is a pretty good way to advertise it.
Yeah,
it certainly does. It certainly doesn't lead to confidence.
Well, Ed, as it looks now, you feel like if things are conducted in a way that's even marginally legal, and if all of our ducks are in a row and we have our folks on the street, you think it's Trump's election?
Yes, I do. But here's the problem. I mean, we have a diabolical and wicked enemy in the corruption that exists in some of these Democrat strongholds. I mean, some of these large cities, Philadelphia, Detroit, places like that, have had a history of corrupt elections, not just involving Trump, but going back, decades and decades. And so that's why it's so important, particularly in the large urban areas, to have, election volunteers on the ground, poll watchers, people there to observe the casting of the votes and the counting of the votes. And so, I think that's what we're up against, that, even though there's this groundswell of support nationwide, you cannot discount the fact that a corrupt election administration, a corrupt election system, all could be manipulated to influence the vote, to take away votes, to affect the vote. And we're talking about both the casting of votes and the counting of votes. So, I mean, the counting and tabulation of the votes is critical. So, I mean, the people that are counting the votes, I mean, how are the votes counted? All of that is so critical. And so, I mean, all of this gets complex at a certain level. In other words, every state is different, and different counties are doing things differently. And so what they're doing in rural Pennsylvania is not going to be what they're doing in Philadelphia or in Pittsburgh. So you see, just in one state, you're going to have differences. And so, we know here in New Orleans that in Louisiana, that in New Orleans, you've got, one group of people running the system, and in, rural Grant Parish and, North Louisiana, you've got another group of people running the system. So everything is going to depend on the people that are there at the election, at the voting booths. They're tabulating the votes. And look, I just want to say this, that I believe that President Trump is going to win this election. I really do. And I believe that God is going to give us one more opportunity to turn things around in our country.
Yeah.
Because, we're on the verge of losing our country. I don't think we could handle 4 more years of what we've seen with Biden and Harris. I just don't see how we could do that. Just the immigration alone is destroying our country. We have 20 million illegal aliens that have entered the country in the last 4 years. We cannot sustain that.
And the thing, Ed, that we can't sustain it, and the thing that, speaking of that, the biggest concern that I have regarding the election is the 20 million illegals who are currently in our country. And I guarantee you, people say, oh, we don't know where they are. We don't know what. I guarantee you, Democratic operatives on every level, they know who they are. They know where they are. And they will be expropriating their identity in the form of the massive number of mail-in ballots that are going to be going in, where they don't require any kind of ID, and where it's virtually impossible to determine whether or not the ballot is valid or not. That's what they're going to be doing. And so, that's the big concern I have, is the massive number of illegals who will be voting across the board through these mail-in ballots.
Yeah. And Ed, we will be certainly following the election very closely, and we will have you back on hopefully in the course of the next week or two to keep us posted, because I believe we'll see a lot of cases getting filed. As you mentioned earlier, this isn't going to be an election without a hitch. I think we can all assume that.
I look forward to rejoining y'all again and commenting on what happens in the future. This is a pivotal election, and we just need to be in prayer for President Trump and all the other candidates. And we need to be in prayer for Elbert Guillory. I think we do have a chance to win that seat here in Louisiana, and hopefully, prayerfully, people will get out and vote for him. So I intend to ask Senator Kennedy today, what is he doing to help Elbert Guillory? So it's a pleasure to be with y'all. Thank you so much. We'll keep you posted on everything.
That's a very, very important question. I'm sure a lot of people would like to know the answer to it. Ed, you're a great American, sir. Good luck in your brief, and hopefully we end up on the other side of this, God willing, victorious. God bless you.
Thanks for joining us today on The State of Freedom. Be sure and check out the show notes for this episode. You can always go there and find the calls to action and resources mentioned in the show, and you can find out more information about our advertisers there as well. If you want to learn more about us or support our work, visit freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org. We'll see you next time. God bless.